This episode of the Lunch with Chris show is brought to you by my upcoming book, 30 Days to Limitless. You can find out more about it at limitless30.com.
This podcast is certified fresh. Freshmediaworks.com.
Welcome to the Lunch with Chris show, where your host, Chris Daly, talks with movers and shakers from all walks of life to get their opinions on important questions. Each season, there is a new question and new guests. This short, impactful show skips all the fluff and just brings you insightful answers from great guests. And now, doing his part to change the world in a positive way, your host, Chris Daly.
To my way of thinking, there's no bigger hero than a hero who fights to protect children. My guest today does just that. He is Michael Weber, and he has a very interesting and very important story. All right, everybody join me in welcoming Detective Michael Weber to the show. Detective Weber, how you doing?
Good.
Good. I guess first, let's go into your background, where you grew up and how you got into doing the work that you're doing now.
Sure. I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. Still here. Apparently I like it.
Yeah.
And went to the University of North Texas, and then became a police officer before I went to college. And I went back to college, got my degree, retired from Arlington Police Department, went to a local DA's office, did 10 years there, then moved to the Sheriff's Department, where I am currently a detective with the Tarrant County Sheriff's Office working crimes against children.
Nice. And so because you're working crimes against children is how you got involved with Munchausen by proxy, which from what I understand is not the right term anymore. Now it's factitious disorder, correct?
Well, I call it what it is.
Yeah.
There's several terms for it. I call it medical child abuse.
Yeah.
And medical child abuse doesn't care about motive, right? I mean, factitious disorder imposed on another, in order for it to meet that classification in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illness, the main motivation has to be attention seeking. Medical child abuse doesn't care about the motive. It's just, this is happening to the child. It may be money, maybe being done to get the child disabled to get money, declared disabled to get money, may be done, for whatever benefit, they don't care. And also I think it calls it what it is. It is child abuse. It is a very insidious form of child abuse, and is often not reported it's often not identified by medical professionals. And even when it is identified and they do report, CPS in Texas has no policies on it.
Really?
Law enforcement has no training on it. I say all the time, it's about, from an understanding perspective, about where child sexual abuse was in the 1960s.
Wow. Yeah, I love the fact that you just call it what it is, because you're right. At the end of the day, your job is to try to help protect children, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And I very happenstancely got into it. When I went to the DA's office, my chief prosecutor assigned me a case that I did terribly on because there was no template out there and to do these cases. I went to her afterwards, and all the injuries or the surgeries, which can be the injuries in these cases, happened out of state. So we transferred. I went to her afterwards and said, "Give me any more of these." She's like, "Mike, that's fine. I've been here 8 years in this position. This is the first one we've had." And I'm like, "Well, that's great, because they're a lot of work, to tell you the truth." But from that point forward, for the 10 years, the 5 years I was allowed to work these cases at the DA's office, there were 16 reports of this abuse, and we filed 6 criminal cases on those offenders. And with five convictions for child abuse crimes and 1 conviction for Medicaid fraud.
And so I guess we should back up and explain what it actually is, because, you know, you and I both know, but there may be somebody who said, what the heck is this thing?
Sure. And it's a form of abuse where usually the mother presents the child as ill in order to get unneeded medical treatment. So it is exaggerating, and it's very important. It's intentionally exaggerating, falsifying, or inducing an illness in a child to get unneeded medical intervention or procedures. And it can be anywhere along that exaggeration, falsification, or induction spectrum, or it can be all of them at the same time. It's not like a step ladder, right? I mean, they can be doing all of those at the same time. They can go straight to induction. It just depends on the offender.
Nice.
And usually the motivation, all motivation, I want to stress, is case dependent. But in all of that said, all of the cases that I prosecuted or that have been prosecuted in Tarrant County, the motive that I've seen has been attention seeking.
Got it.
And it's good to point out, from after I left the DA's office, I went to the sheriff's office, basically to start investigating these cases again because they weren't being investigated in our county. And from the time I joined the sheriff's office, January of 2013 forward, we filed criminal charges on 9 of these offenders. And interestingly enough, Google alerts will let you know kind of what other cases are happening. These cases get news. No other major county in the state of Texas, I've seen no Google alerts for any articles on any arrest in those counties, and they are just happening in Tarrant County.
And so do you think that's because that you're actively looking for it and knowing what to look for?
Yes, correct. We've developed a system in Tarrant County to handle these cases, and no system's perfect, obviously.
Sure.
But I think it's important to point out, normally there is no police investigation in these cases because we just don't know what it is. I mean, normally you have a detective with 30, 35, 40 cases on his caseload. This comes in, he doesn't know what it is, he's never seen it before. He tends to dismiss it as a CPS issue, and you never get a criminal investigation. And without a criminal investigation, you never know. And, that's honestly not fair to either the victim or the suspect, because without a criminal investigation, you don't know the evidence in the case.
And so typically, how is it, discovered? Is it medical personnel or family? Where does it usually get attention?
It can really come from anywhere. I've had it come from most often from the medical community. I've had a school nurse report it. That's led to a prosecution. I had a dad report it. And oftentimes these dads are not taken seriously by police, and especially in family court, they're treated pretty terribly.
Wow. And so what are some of the signs that, other than this kid is sick all the time or hurt all the time?
Well, and I think for the general public, the signs would be that the medical picture you're seeing in the child when you're around the child is not what mom presents, right? Mom may say this child is deathly ill, and you see the child running and playing. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean she's guilty of this, right? But those type of things can be a red flag. For the medical community, my child abuse pediatrician told me a long time ago what the medical community looks for to consider this as a diagnosis is medical symptoms over multiple body systems that don't make medical sense. So you have GI issues along with neurological issues, right? You have mom complaining of apnea spells in the child while also complaining of GI issues. GI issues are a big thing in this. And I used to wonder, do these offenders have a playbook? Because we see the same things.
That was my next question.
Well, we see the same things over and over again. But what I've come to learn is the reason they pick these ailments is because they're hard to medically test for. And they rely on the history from the caregiver. Yesterday I did a training, and I had an attorney ask me, well, how come the doctors don't review the medical records? I'm like, well, 20,000 pages of medical records, it's going to take a month to review it. Do we withhold care from the kid for the entire month?
Right.
Doctors have to trust that history. And who's going to pay for that review, right? They're complicated cases. They take a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of effort. Thankfully, I have a very supportive sheriff who actually is the father of the former victim. He wasn't. He was a local police chief, and I was at the DA's office when I investigated that case. And so he knows this abuse very up close, very firsthand, and he knows the dangers of it. And there's a 6 to 9% mortality rate in this abuse, which makes it one of the most dangerous forms of child abuse.
Wow. Well, and how, I guess nationwide, have you seen a trend where it's increasing, decreasing, or you just don't have enough info?
I mean, we really don't have enough info. And it's also not, you don't hear about it unless there's a police investigation, right? Because CPS is never going to comment. The only ones you're going to hear about are from moms who get their kids back and usually use the media to do so. And they're going to cry to the media that their poor child was taken. They're stolen from them by CPS. And they're very effective. Again, attention seeking is one of the main motivations in this abuse. And what's more attention seeking than getting media to say how you've been wronged by the system?
Right.
And I think my opinion, and it's just my opinion, I think Dr. Mark Feldman says this also, is that these offenders often, they get a mental charge out of fooling people. And I believe out of fooling people that they perceive as at a higher station or smarter than themselves. And they can fool people, very influential people. They can fool. And they have. And I've seen that very firsthand very recently.
Yeah. And what about an organization like CASA, Court Appointed Special Advocates? I understand they don't really get involved until CPS does, but is there training for them, or are you involved with that?
I have done a training for CASA in Tarrant County, and training on this is pretty bereft. I mean, there's just nothing out there other than what I do trainings at national conferences, and I don't see anything else on this topic. And we're talking very large child abuse conferences like the Dallas conference, the San Diego conference, and the Huntsville conference. There's just not a lot out there training-wise for law enforcement and CPS on this abuse. And I think, education is so important because these offenders are extremely manipulative. They present very well. They present like caring mothers in public. But what do we know about child sexual abuse? We know that what happens in public is what happens in private, right? We know that about all child abuse. This is no difference, but you just have a crying, sympathetic mother figure. And a lot of what we fight in this is the public perception of motherhood, right? People don't want that disturbed, and they have a hard time wrapping their head around this type of abuse. And so if you can educate CASA, which we've done in Tarrant County, they can be very helpful on this, but they can also be manipulated by the offender.
Right. Yes, this seems to me like you mentioned them being manipulative, almost like a sociopathy, because they're so into that manipulation and that victory over other people, and the child's just a tool, it seems like. That's correct. And
Dr. Ayub, Dr. Catherine Ayub, Dr. Mark Feldman, Dr. Mary Sanders, that's exactly how they describe the child, as a tool to fulfill the offender's needs. And there's what I've seen is there's no real bond, especially with really young children. There's no real bond once you separate the mom and the child. And that bonding never occurs because several of the most common psych diagnoses in this abuse are narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. And, the thing about those disorders is there's no magic pill to take to get rid of them. It takes lifelong treatment. And CPS in Texas or any other state doesn't do lifelong monitoring.
Are there cases that you've seen where maybe it wasn't somebody consciously wanting to do this and just being a hypochondriac, or do you think that's all manipulation?
No, that's all manipulation. And in my offender interviews, with these offenders, I have gotten some admissions. I mean, they present no different than any other offender in a child sexual abuse case, a child physical abuse case. They'll first lie to me. Then I'll introduce some additional facts, right? They'll then change their story to conform to those facts. And then I may get admissions, but never the whole truth. And number one, that shows the consciousness of guilt because they're trying to hide their behavior, right? Mm-hmm. And that's also every child sexual abuse or child physical abuse interview that I've ever had. They don't really believe their child is sick. They know what they're doing is wrong, and they know what they're doing it when they're doing it. This is a intentional behavior. And I do think, you asked earlier about numbers on this. I think we're seeing an increase because, if you were going to do this abuse in 1992 and you had no medical knowledge, you'd have to go to a library, right? Now it's 5 minutes. Now it's 5-minute Google search to find the symptoms you need to present to the doctor. Doctor's going to see your kid for 15 minutes in the doctor's office. They're going to rely on that history that you present. And from the attention-seeking aspect of it, now we have social media, which is just, gas to the flame on these cases, right? It is, it's great evidence. I have, offenders writing in their own words. And what we see, when we get their social media is that it's what they're writing is oftentimes just fictional when you compare it to medical records. Like, for example, I've had an offender write, "Oh, my child's in the hospital and their oxygen levels are at 30. Yeah, the child's oxygen levels were normal the whole time. So they're just doing that for attention clicks on Facebook, on social media. I don't want to indict Facebook.
Sure. I find it so hard to get my head around that you could do that to your child, but then it's the same thing as a serial killer. I can't get my head around that either.
Right. Child sexual abuse, right? No one can get their head around, normal people can't get their head around that. And, people get really hung up on the psychological angle of this. You'll see news articles that never use the word abuse when referring to these offenders. They talk about their psychological problems. And that would literally be like talking about a pedophile's psychological problems. Pedophilia has been in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illness since 1952. This abuse, which is factitious disorder imposed on another in the DSM, has been in there since 2013. We prosecute pedophiles every day, and you never see a news article that talks about their mental illness, right? Because in the 60s, you got that a lot. You got, stay away from Uncle Bob. He has a problem with kids, right? Not to offend the Bobs in the audience, but and as a qualifier, my brother's name's Bob. Not to offend him either. I know you're not.
Now you pissed off everybody.
We're trying to get a law passed right now, Bill 3381. In the Texas House, it just got voted out of committee. It would make it illegal for a caregiver to intentionally, a very key word, intentionally provide a false medical history to a medical provider in order to get an unneeded medical intervention that caused a bodily injury or mental impairment. Now, anyone who does that intentionally should be subjected to that. It doesn't matter what ailment they're using, and they can use any ailment, right? They can use any ailment. But we have to prove the intent, right? And in these cases, the child learns to get love from their offender by playing the sick role. So when they start to get older and get into those teen years, they often become complicit in the abuse because it's all they know. They also have no baseline for health. Right. And it can destroy, it does destroy a child's childhood. And I've had I've had victims call me who are in their 20s and 30s and wondering, having realized what has occurred and wanting resources. And there's nothing really out there. Andrea Dunlop, her podcast, Nobody Should Believe Me, is really hopefully going to make some headway on this issue. She has also started a 501c3 that has some resources for adults who have been offended against and are just realizing it. And that's the first resource that's been out there. There's nothing.
Wow.
There's no treatment. There's no money dedicated to this abuse. Human trafficking has millions and millions of dollars thrown at it. I get it. I know it's a problem. This has nothing.
Wow. So what is needed? I mean, you could say a blank check, but just give me some steps of things that government can do, that
Sure.
individuals can do.
In a perfect world, what I would like to see happen is children's hospitals, number one.
Mm-hmm.
They need to have dedicated resources that can do medical record review on these cases. Sometimes you're talking 30, 40,000 pages of medical records, and you have to go through them page by page and compare each history mom gives to each other history from the birth of the child. And that is the only way to do it fairly to the offender, right? And so they need special positions in their child abuse units at children's hospitals where all they do is medical record review on medical child abuse cases. It could be accomplished by having an RN. Colorado Children's found out the hard way on the Olivia Gant case, where they put her in hospice and ended up killing her, and charted medical child abuse and never reported. And so remaining family filed a lawsuit. The offender was prosecuted and pled to a 16-year sentence. But the remaining family filed a lawsuit and they settled out of court. I don't know what the settlement was, but they sued for $25 million. So children's hospitals awareness is such a big thing. If we can get them aware and get them to dedicate money toward this, because it's not a position that's going to make the hospital money, right? So they're going to have to do it out of the sense of doing what's right.
Well, and it may save them from a lawsuit too.
Right, and that's the thing. It may save them from a huge lawsuit. Yeah. And thankfully, my children's hospital locally has realized that. Cook's Children's in Fort Worth, and they have I won't comment on it too much, but they are doing things there that should set a standard for nationally for children's hospitals. So you move on from there. CPS has no training. They have no policies on this abuse. Arizona and Arkansas are the two states that have CPS policies on this abuse. That is the next step. I forwarded policies to the CPS administration in Austin, but having been a government employee for 38 years, I understand that government agencies are reactive, and I don't think we'll see a change in CPS policy until we have a very high-profile child death that stays in the news for a very long time. So that's for CPS. Law enforcement need training. Prosecutors. Family court is terrible on this issue. The last two articles on this abuse in the Juvenile and Family Court Journal were in 1990. And obviously things have changed substantially with, like we talked about, internet, social media since that time. They just don't have any education on it. And they often see a mother that presents well, believe their eyes, and return the child to the offender. And the abuse just continues. And those are just initial. And then prosecutors, criminal prosecutors also need training. There's just a pretty vacuum of knowledge on this abuse.
Wow. Gosh, I hate to leave it on a down note. Let's talk about what it is you're doing. You said you've done some trainings. Do you do a lot of training around the country? I'm still a working detective, so right. I do those trainings on my off time. And I think the problem with trainings is people have to realize they have a need for it, right? And they have to realize that, this is something we need. And by the way, this will pile a bunch of more work on us. And it's kind of human nature to kind of, just say, oh, well, we don't have that. We don't have any cases of that here. Well, you have cases, especially if you have a children's hospital in your jurisdiction, you're just not seeing them. So, I do trainings nationally. I do a lot of training through Tarrant County. Tarrant County, I hope, has become very educated on this through what we've done. But, there are still people who resist this and pretty vehemently resist it. And I don't know what to do about that. And people in positions of power. And what do you think their motivation is? And not trying to, that wouldn't hold up in court of law. But what's your idea of why people resist it? It seems obvious to me.
Because they believe their eyes. They see a mom. She goes to church.
Yeah.
She's, maybe she's of the same social status as them. Maybe she grew up playing in their living room or swimming in their pool. It is very hard. Heck, it's a societal problem, just admitting we're becoming more and more polarized and never wanting to admit when we're wrong.
Right.
But especially on something like that, where that is so ingrained that you feel this person, it's very, very hard to admit to yourself that this has happened underneath your nose, especially if you're a member of the legal community.
Right. Wow. Well, Detective Michael Weber, gosh, I wish there was like a call to action. You could say, hey, call this number or donate to this or something like that, something people can do.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is munchausensupport.com, which is Andrea Dunlap's website. That is a 501c3 if they'd like to donate. Also, we have the bill 3381 going to the House floor. Call your representatives. There is opposition to the bill, and it's by a lot of it's from people who don't understand it. And we could just use all the support we can get. We we have a very small core group in Tarrant County that has understood this abuse through several trials and are trying to get things pushed through the legislature. And again, if a law is passed, law enforcement has to train to it.
Right.
So that would increase law enforcement knowledge. CPS would have to create policies. And that's a side benefit of this law.
Cool. Well, we will definitely put some information out in the show notes and share this out as much as we can because it is an important thing. When we first talked, I mentioned that this season I'm focusing on everyday heroes. You said you did not qualify, but I think you do.
I'm just doing a job that other child abuse detectives should also be doing. And it's not their fault. You don't know what you don't know, and when you don't get these reports and you don't have a system set up, then you're never going to see them. Also, being a bad businessman, I should actually plug my website. I do run a side consulting business for training, and that's MikeWeberConsulting.com. And you can contact me there if you're interested in trainings on this form of abuse. And I have done trainings not only for disciplines connected to the child abuse field, but I've done trainings, just general knowledge trainings for people in the community.
Excellent. Well, Detective Weber, again, I want to thank you for sitting down with us and sharing some real important stuff.
I really appreciate the time, and thank you for having me.